Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. Now, I've been looking forward to this next topic. It's called dairy cow personality traits, a new frontier for precision feeding management. And that's with Dr. Anna Schwanke from the University of Guelph. So, Anna, thank you for joining us today. Really looking forward to this one. Before we get started, can you just kind of give us a little bit about your background and what you do there at Guelph?
Yep. So first of all, thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome.
So my background, I finished my PhD under Dr. Trevor DeVries at the University of Guelph in August of last year, 2024. My thesis focusing on how dairy cow personality traits impact their feeding and milking behaviors, particularly in automated milking systems. And currently, I'm the Saputo Dairy Care Program Manager at the Ontario Veterinary College, so providing dairy welfare education to fourth-year vet students, early career veterinarians, as well as dairy producers.
Yeah, cool. You know, kind of an interesting maybe bit of trivia is Dr. DeVries, one of his podcasts is actually the highest number of views. So I don't know why. I guess he's very popular. So tell him too, I'm still going to take him up on the fishing trip. We're going to do the podcast from his ice fishing shanty. So
I'll remind him. Yeah.
we're going to do that next winter. Um, we got my co-host here, Laura Nihus. Welcome, Laura. I want you to tell everybody what you do for Balchem.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I'm the technical services specialist for Balchem. I'm covering the East Coast, so help support the sales managers in the East. Prior to that, I've been in the microbial and bypass protein places within the industry, and I did my PhD at University of Illinois, focusing on amino acids during transition periods. So just so you have some background on me, Anna. And then I did my master's at Kansas State in equine nutrition, and I'm originally from Florida, so I live in Florida currently.
Yeah, good, good. And then we got Bill Early over here.
Thanks,
Bill,
Scott.
looking forward to having you as a guest.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm Bill Early. I'm Dairy Business Manager for ADM Animal Nutrition. I've been with the company for 38 years.
Wow.
Lead a very talented team of dairy technical and dairy specialists throughout the country. And our focus is to enhance profitability and efficiency of our dairy farmers that we serve. Been with the company for 38 years, a Michigan State grad, and live in Western Michigan.
Yeah, and you guys do a great job, by the way. Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah. So, Anna, got a presentation coming up later today. Kind of to provide a foundation for our discussion, what are some of the key elements that you're going to discuss during your presentation?
So I'll discuss the concepts of personality and coping style because it's probably not overly familiar to people from the perspective of personality in animals, and then go through some associations that we've seen in research between specific personality traits and, for this presentation, feeding behaviors and how cows respond to different feeding strategies.
So let's talk a little bit about cow personality. How do they get their personalities, right? I know my dogs have personalities, and I grew up showing beef cattle, so I know that even cattle have personalities. Is it genetics? Is it environment? A little bit of both? What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so it seems to be a little bit of both. We have seen some associations when we do a personality assessment of the dam, and then her female offspring, we've seen some associations there. We're still working to have a better understanding of the exact genetic basis for it, but it does seem to be correlated across generations. And then it is to some degree an outcome of kind of the nurture component as well. So their environment that they're in, how they're handled at a young age, all of those aspects come into play as well.
And is that nurture aspect going to be part of your presentation today?
Not overly. There are ways that we can shape personality, but what I've been working on mostly has been kind of the outcome of that, how they're reacting later in life to what we're providing them.
Okay. Would you mind kind of maybe going over what we do know about how we can shape that personality for the better, right? Maybe both, right? What are some things that make personalities better, and what are some things that we shouldn't do that maybe is creating some problems? The economics of feeding Reassure precision release choline. Reassure is fed during the transition period, and because it's fed for such a short period of time, it costs just $15 per cow, and yet the benefits will continue to generate income throughout the year. Cows fed Reassure produce 5 pounds more colostrum, which pays for your Reassure investment on the very first day of lactation. Cows fed Reassure also produce 5 pounds more milk per day, every day. That means after the first day, every day is payday. Invest in Reassure during the transition period and recoup your investment on the very first day of lactation. After that, you got it, payday.
Yeah, so in terms of how we can shape personalities, a lot of it can be handling. We want to make sure that we're exposing our younger animals to a variety of things, but we want to do that in a non-stressful way. We want them to be able to approach challenges to some degree on their own terms. And then as well, making sure that we're adapting our management strategies to some degree to accommodate that personality trait. Because if we're forcing an animal to behave in a way that it wouldn't naturally, it's going to cause stress. So while we want them to work within the system that we have, we also, to some degree, need to account for behavioral variation and how different animals naturally behave and want to interact with their environment, their social environment.
Can I ask a question, Scott? Dr. Schwanke, as far as different stressors that the animal may go through, right? Whether it's commingling of heifers and with mature cows, whether it's bunk space limitations, whether it's heat stress, those types of things. Can animals adapt their personality or change their personality under those stressors?
Yeah, so the definition of a personality trait is that it is consistent across time and across contexts. That is a little bit nuanced because it's relative to the other animals in that group.
Mhm.
So if we have a group of cows and we're looking at one specific cow, she might be on the higher end of the boldness scale as one example of a personality trait. But then if we put her into another group of cows, she might fall somewhere else. But to some degree, personality is also flexible. So in other animals, we know that personality changes based on seasonality. So during breeding season, some animals will become more bold or more explorative. So the key with that is that within the same group of animals, they're still in the same kind of relative ranking. For a
Do they
personality trait.
reestablish a hierarchy when they're in with a new group of cows? I mean, do they kind of reshuffle the deck, so to speak?
Yes. So personality will, to some extent, determine how that reshuffling happens and who ends up as the more dominant or more submissive cows in that group.
So, Anna, maybe let's take a couple steps back because I'll be completely honest, I don't know much at all about this topic. So, is it possible for you to explain some of those personality traits? Like, what are the main ones you look at, and how is that kind of impacting what your then science questions are in relation to those cows?
Yeah, so the personality traits that we're usually looking at across most animals, including cows, there's 5 that are generally recognized. So boldness, exploration, activity, sociability, and aggressiveness.
Okay.
And then there's some debate as to whether dominance should be considered a 6th trait or if it's just an outcome of the other 5. So those are typically the ones that we would be looking at. And then that will, if you have a specific hypothesis about a personality trait, you would develop your personality assessments to maybe focus on identifying which cows are more explorative or less explorative. But if you're interested generally in assessing all of the traits, you would have a wider variety of tests because some of the tests have a lot more focus on sociability or boldness or aggressiveness.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. I feel like I could have a million questions about this topic, but
It's a really interesting topic. I love it.
It is. There's a lot there, and I have background in training horses, so I feel like there's just there's so much going through my head of just things that I haven't really thought about with cows being similar in that respect to having different personalities. And so, have you looked at then how personality traits might impact then performance, such as lactation performance and that sort of thing? Are you looking at any of those correlations or causations at all in your research?
So my specific research isn't necessarily focusing on the long-term outcomes, so things like lactation persistence or lifetime milk yield, things like that. I've focused a lot more on how cows react to specific stressors, so adapting to an automated milking system, or short-term changes in competition for feed. There has been some previous work looking a little bit more on the temperament side, which is a related concept, that nervous cows produce less milk over lactation, things like that. So that comes back to making sure that we're allowing cows with different behavioral repertoires or personalities to thrive in the environment that we're giving them.
Could you give an example of what that would look like? How would a dairyman change his management style with a more nervous cow compared to a more bold cow to try and not reduce milk yield from a stressor?
Yep. So for an example, I'll use if you're transitioning to an automated milking system. So if you have a nervous cow, probably you're going to know even before you start putting the cows on that this cow might take longer to train. Whether you actually have a training protocol in place for transitioning to an automated milking system. Some people do and some people don't. So if for your overall herd, you're saying, okay, we'll just put them in and see how they do. But you know that you have a few cows that are probably not going to do well with that. I would take those cows and for them introduce them a little bit more gradually to that system if possible.
We see the same with maybe transitioning not just from conventional to AMS, but also maybe to a rotary parlor, right? From a
Yes.
conventional parlor, right? It's something new, and some will adapt readily, and others, are challenged.
Yeah, and especially in Canada, we still have some areas with a lot of tie stall systems, so we see that being a particular challenge in the future.
This is a loaded question. Are there breed differences?
So I haven't worked a lot with jerseys, but I know a lot of stories that they are maybe a little bit, have some distinct differences from Holsteins. So that's not a question that I can answer with any definity right now, but it wouldn't surprise me.
If you were to describe the perfect personality for a cow, what would that look like?
Yeah, that's a interesting question, and there's some discussion on that. It to some degree will depend on your system. So, for example, again, if you have a robotic milking system, you want cows that are probably more independent, more explorative, more bold, because they might be more likely to do well in that system. I think that we're not necessarily aiming to eventually, when we get to this point, select super strongly for a specific trait, but maybe we want to reduce the number of overly fearful cows that we have. We're still going to have cows that are less or more or less fearful than other cows in the herd, but we don't want them fearful to the point that, they're dealing with stress every minute of every day, right?
And what about aggressiveness? Is that one that you want to kind of deselect for?
Yeah, so that would be one that, you want to reduce that to some extent. But again, it can help to minimize long-term agonistic interactions in the pen, because if we have cows that are so similar to each other, it's going to take them longer to establish a social hierarchy.
Yeah, I was going to ask that if you want some diversity, so I guess the answer is yes.
Some diversity is good, and I think, again, it comes back to just minimizing those extreme outliers, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So from a practical perspective, are there specific metrics that a producer can use to identify a specific group of cows, personalities, and what do they do with that information?
Yeah, so right now a lot of it is research-based, so our very specific tests that we would use. So in research, that often looks like seeing how cows react to novelty, so a novel environment, a novel object, a novel person. In a commercial setting, it might be a little bit more based on, walking through the pen, looking at flight distances, doing a approach test to the feed bunk face. Those are some simple tests that don't take too much time, but again, they are a little bit more limited on the information that you get. And depending on the farm size and, whoever's in the pens every day will have a pretty good idea of, your bold cows, your fearful cows.
So do we have, I guess, kind of going off of that question? So based on your answer, I'm guessing that we then don't really have a mapping of what genetics we would want to pull from or where the genetics would point to a cow being more bold or not. Are we not really sure of that quite yet?
Yeah, we're not quite there yet. We have genetic basis for temperament, so that's a really good starting point. And then, yeah, the research is still ongoing with that genetic component of personality and how we would actually go about selecting for certain personality
For certain
traits.
ones.
Yep.
Okay.
So you've kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'm just trying to envision, how do you take this to the field? Is there tools? Is it training? How do we get this so dairy farmers can use it? Maybe we're not even close to doing that yet, but you guys giving some of that some thought?
Yeah, so as you said, it is definitely a long-term goal for the future. So a lot of it will be in research. We're getting a lot more consistency in terms of how we're interpreting these results and finding more consistent associations between specific traits and outcomes, whether it's milk yield, specifics on feeding behavior, things like that. So the goal is that we can have either automated assessments of personality through things like computer vision cameras in the barn, and then feed that information into an algorithm that will, spit out a list like these are your cows ranked on this personality trait based on these behaviors. There's also another.
Is using any of that equipment yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
So that's coming down the road. Probably in a couple years we might be there. And then in terms of practical application, I've talked about personality traits, and that gives us really great information, particularly from a research standpoint, but maybe a more practical framework for application on farm is coping style. So that looks at all of the traits holistically and breaks it up into 3 discrete categories. So it would be proactive, reactive, and intermediate. So proactive cows tend to be more bold, more explorative, more aggressive, more dominant. And then reactive cows tend to be the more fearful, the less active, less dominant. And so proactive cows tend to really thrive in predictable, stable conditions. And then reactive cows do better than proactive cows in unpredictable or changing because they're better able to modify their behavior to the environment that they're in.
So when you say better able to, what metrics are you looking at to quantify that? So is that how they're reacting? Are you taking any blood tests to look at hormones? Yeah, are you looking at any production metrics? How do you quantify
Yeah,
that?
so part of the definition of the coping style framework. So proactive cows have a really strong activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So in response to a stressor, they'll have changes in body temperature and heart rate.
So they want the fight or flight.
Exactly. And then the reactive cows, they have a stronger activation of the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So they will manifest that as changes in cortisol levels.
Okay.
So they will adapt their behavior. So if we're increasing competition for feed, they will adapt their feeding behavior in order to cope with that.
Okay.
But they may have higher cortisol levels because maybe they're not fulfilling what they would naturally be doing for feeding behavior under
Okay.
lower
So they can
competition.
change their behavior, but they're nervous about it.
Potentially, yeah. We don't have a lot of research looking specifically at associations between coping style and associations with feeding behavior or milking behavior right now. So that's where I'd like to see the research transition, is from looking at these individual personality traits to the more holistic framework.
Any big topics that you're going to be talking about in the presentation we haven't uncovered yet?
I don't think any, well, maybe something that we haven't talked about yet is feed sorting and feed preference and how that might relate to personality traits. So some cows might be more motivated or want to have access to a wider variety of feed day to day. Typically we're providing the same feed every day to the same group of cows, but it might be those more explorative cows maybe would like some
Sort more.
variation in that.
Interesting. So, long-term project, a lot of research to do. So, what are some of the big research items on the plate right now for you and for the university?
Yeah, so I'm not doing any active research currently, but I know in Trevor's group that we're doing a lot more work with training cows and different training protocols to put them onto the AMS and how, so the automated milking system, and how cows of different personalities might benefit from different types of training or different exposures to that system. And then yeah, I think longer term, the research will, as I said, look more at coping style as well as with those automated assessments of personality traits or coping style. So.
Okay. So I guess just quickly going off of what Scott just asked, where do you think, so what is the kind of the biggest area in the industry that you think we can impact with this research? So you've talked a lot about automated milking. Do you think that that's the biggest area where we can really take into account the fact that a cow is more anxious or not in a certain environment and can modify management for that, or are there other areas too you think it would be beneficial?
Yeah, so just because a lot of my research has focused on automated milking systems, I do think that's a beneficial area. However, probably the majority of farms aren't using automated milking systems. So I still think that there are really great opportunities in terms of modifying our feeding management, whether that's, the number of feed deliveries, the types of rations that we're putting together for cows, how we're grouping cows to deliver those rations. So
I would see where you've got commingling of primiparous animals or heifers with mature cows, right? There's a huge adaptation there too. Do we treat those groups differently from a feeding management standpoint, bunk space standpoint, cow comfort standpoint, whatever it may be, right? Because that is a huge stressor, and there's a lot of dynamics going on there.
yeah, and some of the research has shown that in both first lactation and multiparous cows, that some animals might benefit from lower competition for feed even beyond what we would typically provide in the fresh or the early lactation period. So again, on a larger farm, we have better opportunities to group cows according to those more nuanced individual requirements, both behaviorally as well as nutritionally.
Sure.
So you said a lot of your work's done with the automated milking systems. Do the traits that are important for those systems, are they translatable to maybe parlors or carousels? Do you have any thoughts or hypothesis there?
I think that, yeah, it's a great question. So with the robotic milking systems, we kind of expected that boldness would play a big role in how well they adapt. And to some degree it does, but actually in the longer term behaviors, it's actually the trait of activeness that seems to dictate a lot of the milking behaviors. And that's probably, again, to some degree because the cows independently have to come into the milking unit. So I think it might be other behaviors in a carousel parlor that might have a little bit more importance because they're milking as a group still. So I think maybe sociability might play a little bit more of a factor there. Yeah, so I haven't done that research specifically, but it's an interesting question for sure.
I'm kind of curious as well about calves, and are there things that we can do with calves that will help them be more adaptable or mold those personalities that's going to be more appropriate for automated milking systems, etc. Any thoughts there? Any research being done there?
I don't know that there's any specific research on that specific question, but there has been a lot of research, particularly by Dr. Heather Neve, who's at Purdue University right now, but her graduate work at the University of British Columbia, a lot of that was focused on finding associations between personality traits in calves and their behaviors around weaning. So she found that cows with specific personality traits had better solid feed intake, both before and after weaning. Some of them did better on an abrupt weaning protocol, I believe, than a gradual weaning protocol. So again, highlighting that those differences are apparent at a very early age. And they are consistent for the most part across an animal's life, but as I said, there are periods of flexibility. So she actually showed that personality traits are consistent from pre-weaning to post-weaning, and then from the end of puberty into first lactation, but they weren't consistent across the post-weaning to end of puberty period. So that seems to be a really significant physiological stressor for our younger animals, is that maturation period. So even if we identify the younger animals, their personality traits or coping style as a calf to determine how best to wean them or how to manage them for that short period of time, they should be assessed later on because there might be a little bit of flux that happens there.
I'm wondering too, with more automated calf feeding systems, right, where you're group housing these calves, right, to kind of take those groups through and see if that translates as they mature, right? Because again, they've got that opportunity to have access to other calves in one setting versus individual housing, right? And it'll be interesting to see if those traits continue as they progress through the system.
Yeah, and I think that could be an important area as well, is with the social housing, based on the animals on your farm, how big should those groups be, and how much space do they need? And there may be periods where your ideal group size is this, but you've had like a really big group of calvings, and maybe some of the animals you have to house how you wouldn't otherwise. So maybe identifying which cows would do better in the different options that are available to you.
So, Anna, just thinking about the future, and I always think with when we start selecting for certain genetic traits and that sort of thing, do you see anything negative that we might inadvertently select for when we're looking at these cows? Because you said diversity is important, so we may not want to just pick the bold cows and that sort of thing. But also just associations within certain ones. So do you see that the bold cows are typically more aggressive, or that just, do you see any future where we might end up, oh, oops, we maybe got too many bold cows and now these calves are really difficult to deal with or something like
Yeah,
that?
the other thing too is you get a bunch of bull cows in a group, right?
Yeah.
And so then you've got some of these more docile cows. Their cortisol levels are up the wazoo, and they're not producing as they could, right?
Exactly. So yeah, that comes back to, as you said, we don't want to eliminate the diversity, and with the more holistic framework of coping style, as I alluded to, the traits can be highly correlated. So often our more active cows are also our more explorative cows, or our more explorative cows are also our more social cows. So yeah, if you're selecting heavily for one specific trait, you're also running the risk potentially of selecting for these other related traits. So again, I think diversity is the key. And as you said, we want to be careful with how we're grouping those animals, especially if we do start selecting more.
And you have to have different personalities for your employees, right?
Yeah.
They've got to be gentle with those cows, regardless.
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely. A bit off topic, but I think still related. Are there things that we can do to condition or train calves during their early life so they'll be more adaptable to an automated milking system once they freshen as a heifer?
So, yeah, I think there hasn't been a ton of research on this to my knowledge, but I think providing opportunities for agency, because with that automated milking system, they do, if it's going to work well, have to go independently. And we do see welfare benefits in terms of animals having agency, even without an automated milking system. So with the calves, it could look like enrichment items, or things like free choice milk, automated milk feeders, so that they have the agency to eat when they want, things like that.
I'm wondering on that too. I mean, some of our AMS system milkings, our AMS lactation systems also have automated calf feeding systems. So those calves are kind of, doing those individual things, going up as they want to. So does that translate then later on that they're more adaptable to that AMS system, and because they're free flow as calves and they're free flow as cows, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I don't think that we have the research right now to be able to answer that. I do know that there was some work in calves showing that more sociable cows or calves did better or didn't do as well with the automated milk feeders because they were having to go individually instead of eating as a group. So the personality traits do seem to have an impact on which systems certain animals do better in. And it could be the same for robotic milking, that those more sociable cows would maybe be better on a rotary or a parlor because they don't have to leave the group to go
Right.
milk.
Any other big areas we need to discuss?
Maybe some technology coming down the road in terms of feeding management and nutrition. Maybe you guys can comment on that. What's based on what I've said, where do you see the available or future technology fitting in?
For me, the hardest thing, and I guess this isn't really an answer to your question, but just what I keep thinking about as you have discussed this, is just how do we make something like this, which is a really interesting idea that can really have large impacts on how much a dairy cow can produce, but how can we make it into something that a dairyman can actually incorporate into their daily schedule? Because especially, I mean, when you're working with 40 cows, it's pretty easy to treat them as individuals. But when you're working with 4,000 cows
Right.
or
Yeah.
40,000 cows, you're not, you need to be able to work with them as a group. And so I guess, yeah, not really an answer to your question, but just thinking for the future of how do we do any of this on a large scale?
Yeah.
Is it just that we group them differently and then there's one management technique for a certain pen versus another? But I just think that that's going to be one of the big challenges as
Questions,
we
yeah.
And I think too, I mean, as we look at precision feeding, right, and we look at efficiency of production, right, how do those personality traits translate, if they do, into efficiency, right? This particular personality trait is going to be more conducive to efficiency. And also then, how do we know individually in those cows? I mean, we've got a lot of monitoring systems, but how do we know individually in those cows, okay, this cow can we monitor her intake better? Can we have systems in place where, hey, this cow's off track. She's not getting the dry matter intake that she normally, yeah, it gets very specific, and I'm just kind of thinking outside the box here, but how do we identify maybe some of those problems proactively as we move forward, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where kind of this machine learning, AI, computer
AI.
vision technology will come into play
Right.
because what I'm looking long term is those personality or coping style assessments can be done automatically. We can monitor in really great detail each individual cow's feed intake, milk yield, as well as feeding behavior. And then that system, hopefully we can develop some algorithms that can make, micro adjustments to ration delivery in the AMS or things like that in order to more precisely manage the feeding for the cows, both from a nutritional and a behavioral perspective. So, ability to feed multiple kinds of feed through the AMS or additional supplemental feed stations in the pen, things like that.
Kind of related to your question, we did a podcast with a company while we were at the Western Dairy Management Conference, and they introduced a new algorithm for their system that actually now is predicting dry matter intake and then giving you an estimate of efficiency. So
That's exciting.
yeah, it is exciting.
exciting.
Yeah, I saw some nutritionists there were pretty excited about
Yeah.
that. So yeah, good. Anna, this has been a very interesting topic. I appreciate you stopping by here
Yeah,
today.
it's been great conversation.
Yeah, it has. What I'd like to do, if you guys wouldn't mind, is just kind of go around the table and maybe come up with a couple things that you'd like to share with the audience of some things that maybe you took from the conversation and that you'd like to share with them. And Laura, if you wouldn't mind, would you like to start us off?
Tonight's last call question is brought to you by NitroSure Precision Release Nitrogen. NitroSure delivers a complete TMR for the rumen microbiome, helping you feed the microbes that feed your cows. To learn more about maximizing microbial protein output while reducing your carbon footprint, visit balchem.com/NitroSure.
Yeah, of course, Scott. So I think the biggest thing for me is that the personality traits are more intricate than I thought originally going into this, and that it's kind of a more nuanced discussion about how they relate to each other and how that might relate to different management techniques, and just overall a more nuanced discussion than I had originally thought it would be. So very interesting in it.
Very interesting for sure. Bill?
This whole area is very intriguing to me, right? Because I think there's a lot that we don't know that can be applied as we move forward effectively. And you look as managers, as coaches, we have personality profiling of our employees, of our people, right? So that we can help them do a better job. And I see the same thing maybe transponding as we move forward or transitioning it into cattle as well. So I'm really looking forward to the applied side of it,
Yeah.
right? And applaud you for your work in this area.
Thank you.
Yeah, we were joking before the podcast that we need to give our cattle a disc analysis or Myers-Briggs or something. But interesting. Anna, final thoughts?
So I guess the main takeaway for those listening is these are still fairly early stages of research. So my concluding thought, I guess, would be that, we're really good at developing rations for nutritional and physiological metabolic needs. So we need to get better at developing that for behavioral needs. So we can develop the most accurate, precise ration. But not every cow is going to respond the same way to that ration. And, my research has focused on automated milking systems, but in our discussion, there's so many other areas that are ripe for research and innovation in this area. So the calf rearing, transitioning to other types of milking systems, grouping of cows, everything like that.
If I might, one thing just kind of triggered my mind. We talked a lot about calves. We talked a lot about the lactation, but also that transition cow,
Yes.
right? I mean, that's critical, right, in getting her first start. So how do those personality traits, I mean, we've got a lot of hormonal things going on and so forth at that point, but are there things that we can be doing there from a personality perspective, from a managing those different personalities so that she's transitioning into lactation and reducing her post-calving metabolics and so forth as well? Because that's a huge stress area.
That's a really great, interesting area for future research. Yep.
Yeah. Anna, this has been an interesting conversation. I want to thank you for joining us, sharing your expertise. It's really been enjoyable. I'm sure the audience is going to love it as well. Laura, thanks again for being a great co-host. You're getting pretty good at this.
Thanks, Scott.
And Bill, I've enjoyed having you. Thank you for joining us, man.
much.
We'll have to have you back. You've done a great job. So, yeah. And to our audience out there, thanks again for coming along with us. Hope you learned something. Hope you had some fun, and I hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends. Hi, I'm Scott Sorrell. I'm here to invite you to a very special event at the upcoming ADSA conference in Louisville. It's going to be a bourbon tasting. We're calling it Bourbon and Brainiacs. Now, why do you call it Bourbon and Brainiacs? Because we're going to have all your favorite professors there doing a bourbon tasting. We're going to have 6 to 8 bourbons there. We're going to be recording a podcast and doing the tasting while we're there. We've even got a bourbon barista, which I'm not sure exactly what that is, but we're going to have one of them there. Now, listen, this is only for 120 of our favorite friends. That's all this place holds. We're going to have it at the Fraser Museum. It's a bourbon museum there in Louisville, and so only 120 people can fit in there, and so we want you to be one of them. And so to become one of the 120, all you have to do is go to balchem.com/bourbon and register. Once those 120 slots are gone, they're going to be gone, but I hope to see you there.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests. So please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.